What an incredible picture of God. That's all I can say. From being the eternal God who doesn't need any sleep to becoming a baby that sleeps most of the time, at least, while it's small, and then trading whatever the glories of heaven are for a barn and a feeding trough for the first bed. I don't think we're ever going to understand the choices that God made in doing what he chose to do. But did you know that God is a God of choices? I mean, he himself is a God that makes choices. And we see that in the fact that from the eternal ages of the past, God knew what was going to happen. He knew the human family would rebel against him. And so he made a choice. I'm going to do something about it. And we see the result. He provided his son to become one of the human race, forever to retain his human nature, even though he is still God. What a choice that God has made. And the benefit is ours now and through eternity. However, in infinite wisdom, God created us with the freedom of choice as well. All are given the opportunity to love and serve God, or to go their own way and do their own thing. We're created in the image of God. God exercised freedom of choice, and he gives us the opportunity to do the same. That time of choice came to Lucifer when he learned that Jesus was the eternal God, his own creator. It is then that we read these interesting words about him. In his heart there was a strange, fierce conflict. Truth, justice, and loyalty were struggling against envy and jealousy in the life and heart of Lucifer. That choice came to Adam as well, and when Eve handed him the forbidden fruit, what am I going to do? He had freedom of choice as well. And we read that an expression of sadness came over Adam's face. He appeared astonished and alarmed. There was a terrible struggle in his mind. Can you imagine the struggle that he was having at that moment? Abraham faced the same moment when, after 3 days of traveling and 3 nights of prayer, he could finally stand beside the altar where he had put his son Isaac, the son of promise, and say, Isaac's birth was a miracle, and could not the power that gave him life restore him to life again? He made that choice as he was standing with an uplifted knife to follow the command of God. Even Jesus faced the moment of choice when we read about his heart crying out to the Father, "O my Father, if this cup may not pass from me except I drink it, thy will be done." 3 times humanity shrank from the last crowning sacrifice, but now the history of the human race comes up before the world's Redeemer. He sees that the transgressors of God's law, if left to themselves, must perish. He sees the helplessness of man. He sees the power of sin. The woes and lamentations of a doomed world rise before him. He beholds its impending fate, and his decision is made. He will save man at all cost to himself. He accepts his baptism of blood, that through him perishing millions may gain everlasting life. What a choice. What a choice. Even Jesus was faced with choices. Well, I want to share with you now for the next few minutes a Christmas story that deals with making choices. And as I share this story with you, as Linda and I share this story with you, I want you to think about the choices that you're making maybe we make choices every day, but you know, there are major choices that we are making as well. And I want to invite you to think about the choices that you're making, choices that will have eternal consequences. So I'd like to invite you for a few minutes to my living room. Doctor, just a moment, please, before you go into the delivery room. The man was about 35, well-dressed and intelligent, an executive of a large oil company. His first baby was to arrive within the hour. He had spent the preceding hours by his wife's side, miserable with the feelings of helplessness and anxiety common to all prospective fathers at such a time, but nevertheless standing by to comfort her by his presence. I must tell you one thing before the baby gets here, doctor. I want that baby, and so does Irene, more than anything that we've ever wanted. I think, but not if it's not all right. I want you to promise me right now that if it's defective, and I know that you can usually tell, you will not let it live. No one ever needs to know, but it must not live. I'm depending upon you.
I have not been in California long before I encountered it there, just as I had encountered it elsewhere. Fortunately, it is a problem that usually solves itself. Babies that are defective, either mentally or physically, after all, are infrequent, yet the possibility of having one hounds almost every waiting mother. Her first question on the opening of her eyes after a baby is born is always either, "What is it?" or "Is it all right?" Whichever question comes first, the other invariably follows, and the one as to its condition is always the more important. However they may feel about it in an individual instances, doctors rightly resent and resist the rather persistent effort to make them the judges of life and death. Our load of responsibility is enough without that. Judgment is difficult, Hippocrates said, when the preservation of life is the only question. If the added burden of deciding whether or not life should be preserved were placed upon us, it would be entirely too much. Moreover, the entire morale of medicine would be immediately threatened or destroyed.
2 years after I came to California, there came to my office one day a fragile young woman expecting her first baby. Her history was not good from an emotional standpoint, though she came from a fine family. I built her up as best that I could and found her increasingly wholesome and interesting as time went on, partly because of the efforts she was making to be calm and patient and to keep her emotional and nervous reactions under control. 1 month before the baby was due, her routine examination showed that her baby was in the breech position. As a rule, the baby's head is in the lower part of the uterus for months before delivery. Not because it is heavier and sinks in the surrounding fluid, but simply because it fits more comfortably in that position. There is no routine spontaneous turning of all babies at the 7th or 8th month, as is so generally supposed. But the occasional baby found in a breech position in the last month not infrequently changes to the normal vertex position, with the head down by the time it's ready to be born, so that only about one baby in 25 is born in the breech position.
This is fortunate, as the death rate of breech babies is comparatively high because of the difficulty in delivering the aftercoming head and the imperative need of delivering it rather quickly after the body is born. At that moment, the cord becomes compressed between the baby's hard little head and mother's bony pelvis. When no oxygen reaches the baby's bloodstream, it invariably dies in a few short minutes. Everyone in the delivery room is tense, except the mother herself in the breech delivery, especially if it is the first baby, when the difficulty is greater. The mother is usually quietly asleep or almost so. The case I was speaking of was complete breech. The baby's legs and feet folded under its tailor fashion, in contrast to the frank breech in which the entire thighs and legs are folded back on the baby's body like a jackknife. The little rear end backing its way into the world first of all. The hardest thing for the attending doctor to do with any breech delivery is to keep his hands away from it until the natural forces of expulsion have thoroughly dilated the firm maternal structures of the delay in its progress. I waited as patiently as I could, sending frequent messages to the excited family in the corridor outside.
At last the time had come, and I gently drew down one little foot. I grasped the other, but for some reason I couldn't understand. It would not come down beside the first one. I pulled again, gently, but with a little more force, with light pressure on the abdomen from above by my assisting nurse, and the baby's body moved down just enough for me to see that it was a little girl. And then, to my consternation, I saw that the other foot would never be beside the first one. The entire thigh from the hip to the knee was missing, and that one foot never could reach below the opposite knee. And a baby girl was to suffer this, a curious defect that I have never seen before, nor have I seen since. Then followed the hardest struggle I have ever had in my life. I knew the dreadful effect it would have upon the unstable nervous system of the mother. I felt sure that the family would almost certainly impoverish itself in taking the child to every famous orthopedist in the world whose achievements might offer a ray of hope. Most of all, I saw this little girl sitting sadly by herself while other girls laughed and danced and ran and played. And then I suddenly realized there was something that I could do to save every pang but one. And that one thing was in my power.
One breech baby in 10 dies in delivery because it is not delivered rapidly enough. And now, if only I did not hurry, if I could slow my hand, if I could make myself delay those few short moments, it would not be an easy delivery anyway. No one in the world would ever know. The mother, after the first shock of grief, would probably be glad she had lost a child so sadly handicapped. In a year or two, she would try again, and this tragic fate would never be repeated. Don't bring that suffering upon them, the small voice within me said. This baby has never taken a breath. Don't let it even take one. You probably can't get it out in time anyway. Don't hurry. Don't be a fool and bring this terrible thing upon them. Suppose your conscience does hurt a little. Can't you stand it better than they can? Maybe your conscience will hurt worse if you do get it out in time. I motioned to the nurse for a warm, sterile towel that is always ready when we have a breech delivery, to wrap around the baby's body so that the stimulation of the cold air of the outside world may not induce a sudden expansion of the baby's chest, causing the aspiration of fluids or mucus that might bring death. But this time the towel was only to conceal from the attending nurse that which my eyes alone had seen. With the touch of the pitiful little foot in my hand, a pang of sorrow for the baby's future swept through me, and my decision was made.
I glanced at the clock. 3 of the allotted 7 or 8 minutes had already gone. Every eye in the room was upon me, and I could feel the tension in their eagerness to do instantly what I asked, totally unaware of what I was feeling. I hoped that they could not possibly detect the tension of my own struggle at that moment. The nurses had seen me deliver dozens of breech babies successfully, yes, and they had seen me fail too. Now they were going to see me fail again. For the first time in my medical life, I was deliberately discarding what I had been taught was right for something that I felt sure was better. I slipped my hand beneath the towel to feel the pulsations of the baby's cord, a certain index of its condition. 2 or 3 minutes more would be enough. So that I might seem to be doing something, I drew the baby down a little lower to split out the arms, the usual next step, and as I did so, the little pink foot on the good side popped out from its protective towel and pressed firmly against my slowly moving hand, the hand into whose keeping the safety of the mother and the baby had been entrusted. There was a sudden convulsive movement of the baby's body, an actual feeling of strength and life and vigor.
It was too much. I couldn't do it. I delivered the baby with her pitiful little leg. I told the family, and the next day, with a catch in my voice, I told the mother. Every foreboding came true. The mother was in the hospital several months. I saw her once or twice, and she looked like a whiff of her former self. I heard of them indirectly from time to time. They had been to Rochester, Minnesota. They had been to Chicago and to Boston. Finally, I lost track of them altogether. As the years went on, I blamed myself bitterly for not having had the strength to yield to my temptation.
Through the many years that I have been here, there has developed in our hospital a pretty custom of staging an elaborate Christmas party each year for the employees, the nurses, and the doctors on the staff. There is always a beautifully decorated tree on the little stage of the auditorium. The girls spend weeks in preparation. We have so many difficult things to do during the year, so much discipline, and so much of the stern realities of life that we have set aside one day to touch upon the emotional and spiritual side. It is almost like going to an impressive church service, as each year we dedicate ourselves to the year ahead. This past year, the arrangement was somewhat changed. The tree on one side of the stage had been sprayed with silver paint and was hung with scores of gleaming silver and tinsel ornaments, without a trace of color anywhere and with no lights hung on the tree itself. It shone but faintly in the dimly lighted auditorium. Every doctor of the staff who could possibly be there was in his seat. The first rows were reserved for the nurses, and in a moment the procession entered, each girl in uniform, each one crowned by her nurse's cap, her badge of office. Around their shoulders were their blue-red cross capes, with one end tossed back to show the deep red lining.
We rose as one man to do them honor, and as the last one reached her seat, we settled into our places again. The organ began the opening notes of one of the oldest of our carols. Slowly down the middle aisle, marching from the back of the auditorium, came 20 other girls singing softly. Our own nurses in full uniform, each holding high a candle lighted with the thought, while through the auditorium floated the familiar strains of Silent Night. We were on our feet again instantly. I could have killed anyone who spoke to me then, because I couldn't have answered, and by the time they reached the seats, I couldn't see. And then a great blue floodlight at the back was turned on, and very slowly, gradually covering the tree with increasing splendor, brighter and brighter until every ornament was almost aflame. On the opposite side of the stage, a curtain was slowly drawn, and we saw the three lovely young musicians, all in shimmering white evening gowns. They played very softly in unison with the organ, harp, a cello, and a violin. I am quite sure I was not the only sissy whose eyes were filled with tears.
I have always liked the harp, and I love to watch the grace of a skillful player. I was especially fascinated by this young harpist. She played extraordinarily well, as if she loved it. Her slender fingers flickered across the strings, and as the nurses sang, her face, made beautiful by a mass of auburn hair, was upturned as if the world at that moment were a wonderful and holy place. I waited when the short program was over to congratulate the chief nurse on the unusual effects she had arranged. And as I sat alone, there came running down the aisle a woman who I did not know. She came to me with arms outstretched. "You saw her," she cried. "You must have recognized your baby. That was my daughter who played the harp, and I saw you watching her. Don't you remember the little girl who was born with only one good leg 17 years ago? We tried everything at first, but now she has a whole artificial leg on that side, but you would never know it, would you? She can walk, swim, and almost dance. But best of all through those years when she couldn't do anything, she learned to use her hands so wonderfully. She is going to be one of the world's greatest harpists. She enters the university this year at 17. She is my whole life, and now she is so happy, and here she is."
As we spoke, the sweet young girl had quietly approached us, her eyes glowing, and how she stood beside me. "This is your first doctor, my dear, our doctor," her mother said. Her voice trembled. I could see her literally sweep back as I was through all the years of heartache to the day when I told her what she had to face. "He is the first one to tell me about you. He brought you to me." Impulsively, I took the child in my arms. Across her young shoulder, I saw the creeping clock of the delivery room of 17 years before. I lived again what awful moments when her life was in my hand, when I had decided on deliberate infanticide.
I held her away from me and looked at her. "You never will know, my dear," I said. "You never will know, nor will anybody else in the world, just what tonight has meant to me. Go back to your harp for a moment, please, and play Silent Night for me alone. I have a load on my shoulders that no one has ever seen, a load that only you can take away." Her mother sat beside me and quietly took my hand as her daughter played. Perhaps she knew what was in my mind. And as the last strains of Silent Night, Holy Night faded again, I think I found the answer and the comfort that I had waited so long for. And now I would like to invite you to join with us in singing that song, Silent Night, Holy Night.
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant so tender, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. Silent night, holy night, darkness rise, all is light. Shepherds hear the angels sing, Alleluia, hail the King. Christ the Savior is born. Christ the Savior is born. Silent night, holy night, Son of God, lost to light, radiant beam from thy holy face, with the dawn of redeeming grace. Jesus, Lord, at thy birth, Jesus, Lord, at thy birth. Silent night, holy night, wondrous star, lend thy light. With the angels let us sing, Alleluia to our King. Christ the Savior is born. Christ the Savior is born.
Would you bow your heads with me in prayer? Kind Heavenly Father, we just want to thank you that somewhere in the past of eternity, you made a choice to do something about a human race that would forever change the course of the universe. We want to thank you for being willing to come to this world and become one of us, that we might have the hope and the surety of being redeemed and restored into your likeness, to live and to reign with you for eternity. We can't imagine what that will be like, but we know that your word is sure. And so today we just want to say thank you. Please come into our heart again and live out your life within us. Change us into your likeness, that someday soon we might behold you face to face and live with you for eternity. We thank you and we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.